Top of the Props is brought to you by Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming, 1/10 Hollylee Road, Lemire. Find them on Facebook. Barkingham Palace Dog Grooming Macarthur, where every pup's a king or queen. And GameView. GameView is a statistical application that allows you to track, analyse and improve your team's and players' performance by capturing team and individual player statistics. Find out more, gameview.com.au. So we are now up to episode 18 of Top of the Props, and boy does it fly. And I'm very, very happy to speak to a bloke in a second, doing my research today and just having a little look on social media and just searching this guy's name and some of the responses and some of the comments from Rabbitohs fans from that era who grew up with a very, very good South side through the back end of the 80s. He played 169 games for South. He is a true great of the club. 4 games for the Blues, and some say one of the best players to never get to represent Australia. It's Mr. David Boyle. Thank you very much for being on Top of the Props, David.
Absolutely. Pleasure being with you, Curtis.
I have written down a few of the quotes, mate, so I don't want to pump you up too much, but here's a couple of quotes from some South fans just about yourself and the way you played. Genuine 100% hard man. Another one says, he gave everything every week. Another one that says, one of my favourite all-time bunnies, one of the best players to never win a premiership. It still must be great to be remembered that way, particularly by South fans, but footy fans in general.
Yeah, very flattering, Curtis. You know what? I wasn't that good of a player. I was a grub. But I was with a great bunch of guys. I was fit and I could take a hiding. That was about my attributes.
It's funny, I actually wrote down that quote, and I was about to ask you about that. I was fit and I could take a hiding. It was word for word. How early on in your career did you realise that you weren't going to be as big as blokes like Steve Roach and Paul Sirinen and all these other fellas, and you were kind of, I guess, you know, basically your position was in the middle of the field. How early on did you realise, okay, I'm going to have to be fitter than everyone, and I'm going to have to hit harder and give it back as hard as I take it?
Interesting story, Curtis. I was actually training with Newtown and South for a few weeks.
Okay.
Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, I was with Newtown. And on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, I was with South Sydney. Because I had a good friend in Michael Carberry, and he was an upcoming star. So because I was fit, I was coming, the top 3 for all the runs. So they said, if you stick with South, you'll get a contract. And I was actually got a contract to be a driver for Mick Carvey and keep him company because we both lived down the South Coast.
Yep.
So I knew right from the start that I had to be fitter and I had to be more aggressive than anything if I was going to get a run in first grade.
You just called yourself a grub. I think that was the word you just used, but I've still got it playing now, mate, and I know we're going to get to it a little bit later, but I'm just on KO Sports watching the 89 final against Balmain, and you just took a shot off the ball by Paul Sirinen. And you jump back to your feet, and that's just part and parcel of the game, but to say that, call yourself a grub, I mean, there were a lot more grubbier players, if you want to call them that, back in that time, surely.
Well, it'd be a grub now. It was okay then.
Yeah.
The funny thing about the way you played footy then was with Ciro and with Big Steve Roach, you'd try to whack them and hit them as hard as you possibly could and then go buy them a beer after the game.
And it was a badge of honour because that's what it was, wasn't it? It was, you guys had, and just looking up at the screen now, you guys had Ian Roberts and Les Davidson and, a really good pack yourselves. I mean, going back to this size thing again, I mean, did you grow up knowing that you could throw them a little bit and hold your own, or is that something that came into your game a little bit later? Because obviously you were always fit, but did you always have that hard edge where you could give it back just as well as you took it?
I'm very placid off the field. On the field, I just changed to a different person. And then when you're playing with the Ramplings and Peter Tunks and Nick Andrews and Les Davison, you either stand up and be counted or they'll tell you to get lost.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too, I guess, is from that era that I guess we've tried to explain a little bit on Top of the Props. And I know off their own bat. Other guys have mentioned it themselves. Guys like Steve Jackson and Pat Jarvis and blokes like this. They've said, playing that era, it didn't matter if you were playing the bottom place team or the top team. Being a front rower in that era, there was never an easy game, and there was always blokes, harder heads, rookies coming through. There was always another bloke the next week that wanted to get it over you. So there was never an easy game playing in the middle back then, was there?
No, you couldn't hide.
Yeah, and like just I was going to hold it to the end, but this '89 game against Balmain, and just looking at the endurance of the players on the field, that was the other thing too, is that there was no other way. That was the only way a forward knew at that time, was basically if you came off, that was it for your day, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there was only 2 reserves. Yeah.
Mm. So where did the journey start? So you're a South Coast boy, are you?
Yeah, in the Group 7 competition down Shell Harbour, Warilla. Yeah.
And so when you were down that way, I mean, were you planning on? Did you have aspirations to play first grade, or like I know you touched on that? There was South and Newtown, but how did you get up to Sydney?
I had no ambitions of playing in the New South Wales Rugby League competition. And then I become good friends with Nick Carberry.
Yeah.
And he was training with him. We both met at Port Kembla.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a year in the Illawarra competition. And then I went back to Warilla because my brother was coaching after a year in Illawarra. And then I had an uncle that was a talent scout for Newtown. So he said, do you want to come up and have a run? And I got overlooked by the Steelers. And I started running up at Newtown, and I was doing okay there, and then I went over to South, and Terry Parker said to pick up Nick Carberry because we'd travel up together.
Mm.
He said, listen, why don't you have a run here? So
Yeah.
I started running there, and then it just went on from there, and I just loved it. And South had always been my favourite club. And it was, when after a couple of weeks when Bill Anderson said to me, listen, if you stick around here, we're going to start doing some skills. So we'll offer you a contract if you stay with us. So the next day I drove up to Newtown and went to Frank Barrington and said, mate, I've got an offer at South. I really appreciate what you've given me here, but I want to be coming back.
And the rest is history with the Newtown club, of course. Around that same time, they make a grand final, and they're kind of booted from the competition not long after.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, your first grade, I guess and I have been corrected by this by some of the other guys that I've spoken to. So I have mentioned how to, your first grade debut off the bench, and they say, well, hang on, you kind of sat on the bench anyway. So your first actual run on was round 5 in '82 at Leichhardt Oval, against guys like Hemsley and Jack and Pearce, and then all of a sudden you're playing first grade. Did you have a chance to soak that all in, or was it just kind of million miles an hour, young bloke, just happy to be out there and playing footy?
That was another funny story because I'd already played third grade with Paul Sates under 23s.
Mm.
Then I had to fill in reserve grade with Brian Smith, and then Mitch Brennan got smashed. And then I went out. They said, Boyle, get out there. Olsen Filipano just finished Mitch's game straight away, so they put me out there, yeah.
Were you blowing by the time you got out for first grade, or was just the adrenaline took over?
I think I played 112 minutes and got about $1 for every minute I played for that day, and 3 losses.
I hope someone bought you a beer after the game at the Lees Club.
I was pretty thirsty, yeah.
So you guys actually go down that day, 12-8. 3 more games in '82. They're all off the bench, but I guess in '82 it's just as much a learning experience being in Sydney. Leading into '83, because just looking at your career from '83 onwards, it's basically full on from there. So, did you need that first 12 months in Sydney, reserve grade and a few tastes of first grade just to prepare you for what was to come after?
Absolutely, man. I played the Charity Shield, and then I took the ball up and I ran into the Dragons pack, and I thought, if this is Sydney football, I'm not sure I want to be part of it. I just saw stars, and that was probably the best thing because I got bashed up a fair bit. And I thought, and I talked to the Ramplings about it, and they said, mate, just get into it, and if they you get hit back, it's only a square up. So you get so lucky with the guys you play around, and we're still all great mates now. Like the Craig Colemans, Mick Andrews, Les Davisons, the Ramplings, Charlie Frith. Yeah, it just, we catch up twice or three times a year. It's just great.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Charlie Frith, is he the like he's a bit of a urban legend. There's not much information about him online, but was he he had a real reputation of destroying opponents. There's a story. I'm pretty sure it was him at Lidcombe one day where he hit a Magpies player that hard that all his teeth came out.
Bill Colerci, yeah.
So that happened?
Yes, it did. It did. And the funny thing about it with Charlie, he's the loveliest bloke, and then he used to get in trouble for not making many tackles, but they wouldn't run at him. It was like running on North Sydney or the cricket ground. You just stayed away from the cricket pitch.
Yeah, and it's funny because you've mentioned the Ramplings a couple of times already, David, and just doing a bit of research today as well. You mentioned them in other interviews too. Were they the guys that took you under their wings, or was there other players as well that helped you along in your first couple of years?
Gary Hamley was great. The Rampling brothers, Mario, Craig Coleman really looked after us, and we're still great mates. Mick Andrews, Paul Roberts, Wayne Chisholm, yeah, and Ian Roberts, Lindsay Johnson, yeah, and Mick Carby, yeah, it's just a great game, on and off the field.
Can you explain, and even for myself, some of the younger listeners that wouldn't be quite across what it was like, or even for South fans, younger South fans. I mean, back in the day, Redfern Oval, football on the weekend at Redfern Oval was the same as anywhere else. Belmore, Leichhardt, and of course, after a few years, South moved away from Redfern Oval. Can you explain what the community feel was like back in the day when all the players lived in the area, and then on a Sunday afternoon you'd get down to Redfern and you walk into the ground, you can smell the the hot dogs and the deep heat and all the rest of it. Can you try to paint a picture for us what Redfern Oval used to be like?
Yeah, it was. They've got a pretty highly Indigenous population, and the people around the streets. I had my car stolen by a 14-year-old one day, and I said to the guy at the gate, I said, "Mate, did you notice my car being taken?" He said, "I thought it was unusual seeing a little fella driving around, isn't it?" And I found it 3 days later. When we used to walk into our dressing shed, there was a slant because it was underneath the grandstand, and we used to enjoy just sitting out there talking to the trainers and all that, and just watching people walk in and hit their heads from that. It was a pretty sick sense of humour, but it was pretty funny when they'd hit their head on the beam going down.
I suppose it'd take your mind off what was coming up too.
Oh, yeah. And then people would come to train, and then we'd go for a warm-up out in the park. There'd be people sleeping on the benches and things like that. It's just we talk about Devon and ham places, with Burnley being the ham and we're on the Devon sandwiches and stuff, and you aspired to it. It was just home. It was good.
And I'm sure at some point, you're going to bring this up. So let's get it out of the way, because it's kind of around this time too. The start of '83 starts a decade-long war between you and Gavin Miller. And I know you've spoken about this before, and I'm sure you've been up on stage at different functions and whatnot, and spoken about this too. But can you just explain quickly to us how this whole thing started with Gavin Miller and how it escalated and just went on and on all the way through the 80s?
So the South Pack, we're pretty aggressive and honest with each other. And then I was new to the footy, so the Rampling says, "What's you up to this, Gavin Miller? He's a bit of a grub, and he'll cheap shot you."
Yep.
And that's all it took. And then, I got up, he pushed me, and I just hit him in the mouth, and it sort of just went on from there. And
was he the first bloke to get into you?
Yeah.
So do you feel like if you didn't step up and give him one back right there, that set you up for the rest of your career, right?
Well, certainly I'd lose faith from the teammates, and in those days you never wanted to let your teammates down. So they'd tell you if you had to go if you didn't.
And that's the thing too. Like for a younger bloke like myself, only 34, not a Sharks fan. Don't really know the Sharks' history all too much. But what I do know is Gavin Miller was he won a Rothmans medal and a Dally M, and he was a ball playing lock and all this other stuff. But I didn't really know that that was part of his game. And this continued into 88, 89 over in the UK, playing English football as well.
So he played for Hull Kingston Rovers. I played for Hull FC. Yeah. And even that was over there. Like, you had Blocker Roach and Les Davison and Les Boyd, Phil Blake playing for Warrington, and I had Tugger with me and Dave Moon. And Sam, Big Sammy Bacco, he was over with Leeds. And we used to have Aussie days and catch up with everybody. And, yeah, it was fun over there. But, with Gab, just when we got on the field, he just wanted to, it become him and me in the cage above the ring, leaves the football field. So it was pretty interesting.
And you guys have had a beer since he's retired?
Yeah. So they have the State of Origin launches, and we've sat at the table, and he's mellowed a lot since then. He kind of held the grudge there for a while. So North Corolla Surf Club, I run surf boats, and North Corolla Surf Club were trying to have a fundraiser, and they said, I want to put a fight between you and Gavin Miller. I said, oh, that's okay. And then he said, they come back and say, oh, Gavin wants to fight you without gloves. I said, no, tell him, what stays on the field stays on the field.
Oh, Jesus. In 83 too, you got a new coach in Ron Willie. So can you just, and we'll speak about George Piggins a little bit later, but can you explain the differences in the coaching styles between Willie and Piggins?
So Willie and Piggins, Ron Willie was a no-nonsense player, and just gave you entitlement. Wanted you to go up, play hard, and try to unload. So between Bill Anderson was very structured the year before, and taught us a lot about the game with Brian Smith being my major coach. And then Ronnie just said, mate, just go out there and belt them and try to do things. So, and that was really good. And then George Piggins coached us, but I guess the smartest thing that George did was sign up Gus Gould. And then I roomed with Gus on trips away, and I probably did a lot of his tackling. But just learned so much off Gus. He was awesome. And it was George's credit who brought Gus on and gave a lot of us on field, tell us what to do, where to go. And again, because of those guys, I was lucky that I played State of Origin with all the injuries to Blocker and the other guys.
I saw another interesting quote from a fan online saying, and you can probably explain this to me, is basically the quote said, Boyle gave Gus Gould more time on the field. Can you explain that to me and what that means?
So I scored 7 tries in 10 years. 8. I scored one in the State of Origin. But when I played with Gus, I'd run off him, and I scored 2 tries in one game. So that took my averages down. But, man, he was so intelligent. And then we'd be awake, like we'd be rooming together at 2 o'clock in the morning. He'd be talking to me about football and the game, and I was just like a sponge. And even to this day, he's everybody knows how smart Gus is.
And I can't remember who it was. I can't remember who it was. Someone was telling me about even when he was at Newtown as a kid, and the great Warren Ryan was kind of at different times letting him go through the tactics with the first grade side. I don't think there's a much brighter football mind that we'll ever see than Phil Gould. But I guess I already asked you this, so we'll move on. I was just going to say who helped you the most through that period. We touched on that. But between 84 and 89, the Rabbitohs make the finals 4 times, the prelim in 89 as minor premiers as well. Do you, when you look back with your teammates at that time, do you guys look back at 89 exclusively and say that was our real shot? Or did you look at other years in that period and say, we probably should have gone further into the finals than we did?
Yeah, in 89, we had a lot of injuries. We were pretty busted. And then I think also we have playing fullback Bronco de Jura.
Mm-hmm.
And there was Gary Belcher and Jimmy Jackett, the Raiders, and their kick returns were awesome.
Yeah.
And then Bronco, while he was a wicketkeeper for New South Wales, a standby wicketkeeper, he just didn't have the speed.
Yep.
So I thought that probably we could have went a little bit better with David Cruikshank, might have been a better option there at fullback. But, that's the way it is. And the other thing is, we played against, we lost it. We just kept going out the back door, where we went through, lost to the Tigers, and then I actually dubbed my knee against Canberra Raiders in the first 2 minutes. I did an ACL on the other knee, so yeah, we sort of struggled a bit there towards the finish.
So this is probably and on the last episode I spoke to Gary Larson, who I think played 50 games at prop, so he qualifies, and I was very happy to have him on as well. We spoke about 94 with Gary and the fact that he it burned him a little bit. I could you could tell in his voice that he was burnt, that he didn't go on that 94 Kangaroo tour. 86 was a strong word. I'm sure you were getting a tip from people around your club that you were right in the mix. Do you feel like you should have went on that tour, or was it just kind of it is what it is?
No, I don't think I was ever that good.
Yeah.
I thought after the State of Origin in '87, because we only had one test against New Zealand, and we went pretty bad. And Les Davison got a run, and he come on and single-handed bashed the Kiwis. There might have been some sort of hope there, but no, I wasn't. It was just something that was just out of my reach.
Well, let's talk about something that you grasped, mate. In '87, you play all 4 games of Origin, and we'll get to the game in Los Angeles in a minute. But just if you can paint a picture, I mean, you're a footy fan from way back, coming up from the South Coast. You already mentioned your brother, your uncle, right into football down there. You come to Sydney. As a kid, like you said, you had no aspirations of playing first grade, but you still obviously loved the game. Could you believe it when you were good enough to play, but I guess there's a little bit of kid in everyone where they're finally told they're going to play for New South Wales, and all of a sudden you're at Lang Park for game 1 of '87. Can you remember what was going through your head as you went into the old Lang Park and 35,000 mad Queenslanders just ready to rip your heads off?
Yeah, it was probably one of my most memorable experiences is getting named in the State of Origin. But playing with the Brett Kennys and Wayne Pearces and Peter Sterlings, and man, it was just a dream come true for me. I'd won the lottery, and going up there too. And Ron Willie was our coach.
Yep.
So he was good, and then and Royce Simmons, they all looked after me. It was just a great preparation, and to play was just it was the pinnacle of my career. So and there's a funny story there because I got busted open pretty bad. So we had a doctor that stitched me up. He didn't do a real good job. So Nathan Gibbs was a good mate.
Yep.
And he was there, so he stitched me up again. And then we'd missed the team bus, so we'd won, and I had to walk through the cauldron there to get a taxi back to our hotel. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, it's just you can't, words wouldn't describe how a kid from Warilla made it to the State of Origin. So it was pretty special.
And that's the thing too, up until I think 85, where Mortimer famously collapses on the ground and looks up to the heavens and say the Blues have finally done it, and or maybe it's 84, but it doesn't matter. But around that period, the Blues had finally won a couple of series, and they were finally taking it seriously. Even in '87, I guess you guys had to really buy into this Origin concept, and one of the hardest things to do, I would assume, would be to go to the Old Lang Park in the first game of the series and get the win, because that basically gets you halfway home, because you've only got to win one of two, and the next game's in Sydney. So you guys do the hard part, and you win game one. And just looking, I think it was 20-16 from off the top of my head. Just definitely not looking at my notes here. But then you get to game two, and you're starting. This is your first start. It's in Sydney at the Sydney Cricket Ground, and the pack, Pat Jarvis, who we've had on top of the props before, Royce Simmons, Steve Folkes, Les Davidson, Wayne Pearce, and yourself. That's got to be one of them. You look at those names and you think that's one of the great. I look at that and go, one of the great packs that are going to get through 1 million miles of work and get it done. But then all of a sudden, the heavens open, and this is the game that's played in the mud, right? And Dowling scores that try underneath the post where he catches it with his fingertips.
Yes.
Is that the
yes,
game?
It was. Yeah.
Tell us about that. Was it piss and rain all day in Sydney, or did that come later?
No. It was a quagmire. And
did that bring Queensland back into the game?
Well, it certainly probably suited them. You know, we had Michael O'Connor and Brian Johnson on the wing, and Cotton Cleo and all that. Yeah, man. And unlucky I had Les Davison with us as well. So it was just good having the teammate there. But as good as the win was, so was the loss. To think that, you know, you're with these esteemed players, and we just couldn't beat them, and which really set up the scene for the third state of origin.
And then you have to go back up there and do it again. And I guess as much as anything, for someone that watches Origin from a distance, I guess the mental letdown of thinking, you know, we're back in front of the home crowd, we can clinch the series, and then you've got to climb Everest again back up at Brisbane, and it was just one mountain too many, and you couldn't quite get there. But a bit of fun at the end of it is the game in Los Angeles. Now, Pat Jarvis told a few good stories about LA and the trip over and the party the boys had, but and I think he mentioned on his episode that he missed out on the party afterwards because he broke something. I can't remember what he broke, but he had to fly straight back. What was it like? I mean, this was the first. This is crazy, because even if they did that even if they did it today, 2020, taking Origin to Los Angeles, you'd think this is crazy. This is amazing. And you did it back in '87. You know, what was it like flying over there? You know, Disneyland and, you know, partying around LA and obviously, you know, showcasing the game, because I guess you had to do that too, right? Play a bit of football while you were there.
Yeah, well, that's another interesting story, because George Piggins made Les Davison and myself, plus Jonathan Docking and Andrew Ettenhausen, come home straight after the game.
Oh, really?
We didn't get to stay there. No.
Fuck.
No.
Were you dirty on George?
Yeah, to a certain degree. Because we played 30 minutes, both Les Davison and I, on the wing in reserve grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was, you know, like, those days there wasn't a lot of money and we didn't travel too much, and yeah, to go over to the States and and then Ron Willie, he didn't want us to drink, so we weren't even allowed to drink coffee on the plane. and we were on the same plane as the Queenslanders, and they were down the back of the plane. They were blind.
Yeah,
we went through Hawaii, and they were just shit-faced.
Yeah. Jarvis said the same thing. They were down the end of the plane getting hammered.
Yeah, and good luck to them too. So I don't know whether they took it really seriously, but because we didn't win the series, Ron Willie said, you know, and that was the way Ron was. You know, we were there for winning, and that was it.
Well,
anyway,
unofficially 2-2 in the series, right? But
yeah. So that was okay, and that was good. And then and the other thing about the footy now, so it gave us the hunger. So I've had about 25 trips over there since then. So that's probably a good thing that I didn't split up with it the first time. And yeah, that's another good thing with the trips away we had. We'd go over there and it'd be fantastic.
You're a bit of a hard marker on yourself, but what was your review of what you did in '87? I mean, were you hungry for more rep football after that? Like, did you have any idea that you wouldn't play for the Blues again after '87?
No, and So what happened then? I started getting knee injuries.
Mm.
So and I'd actually done my cruciate in '86, so I didn't have an anterior cruciate. But Nathan said there's no instability there, so I kept playing, but it was getting worse and worse. And then, and now 13 operations later, the last replacements, you wonder whether I should have had it, but I didn't. So, so I wasn't real fit after that. And then a lot of good players come back, and the team didn't go that well in '88. So I'd only look good if the team was going good.
Yeah. You mentioned Les Davidson a few times too, and you said you were lucky to have him in your rep sides. But can you explain to us, like, because obviously we all know what Les Davidson was like on the football field, and I'd love to get him on here one day to talk to him. I don't know if you will ever do it, but he reminds me of just like a Dirty Harry kind of Clint Eastwood, but 4 times bigger. What was Les Davidson like away from the footy field?
You know, Les Davidson's really quiet. He doesn't even answer the phone, and pretty humble. But he wasn't that big either. He wasn't really a heavyweight. And George Piggins used to tell him, "You're not big enough to do that." But in saying that, he was tough, and he could throw him.
Oh, well, I saw some of that against Blocker on the highlights here on the telly before. I mean, was he one of the players where, like, players would, I guess back in that era, there was nowhere really to hide. So when you had to take your runs, you took your medicine. But could you sense that on the field that players would kind of try to steer clear of blokes like Les Davidson, just for their own well-being more than anything?
We could be getting beaten by 30 points, and one day we were. We're getting hiding, and my nickname used to be Hooky. But he said, and there was about 2 minutes to go, and we're down by 30, and he said, "Hook, let's take someone with us."
Who was it? Who was the unlucky bastard?
And here's the other end of it. So when I'd finished at South, I stayed around for South for a few years, and then Alan Jones come in, and I thought, I left anyway, and I went to the Dragons with Brian Smith, and I had Gordon Tallis, a young Gordon Tallis and a young Jason Stevens, and they were playing Cronulla, and Les was playing for Cronulla, and they were absolutely shit scared of him. So that tells you, like, two really tough kids, because Jason Stevens was a bit of a rat bag when he was young. He's mellowed out a bit, but yeah, they were terrified of Les Davidson. I said, he's only human.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
How'd they go against Les?
We lost. Yeah, they were just he had him, and like at that stage he was pretty late because it was heading into the Super League. But yeah, he put the death of God in him. So you were down at St George as a like an assistant to Brian Smith, is that right? Strength and conditioning coach, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for the last 30 odd years or something.
Yeah, and you're doing pretty well, and I was going to touch on that a little bit later, but just quickly going back to the rat bags as you called them at St George, reading Gordon Tallis's book about the young blokes getting around down at Sizzler, and I think they had a kind of halfway house that half of them lived at as well. Was that an interesting experience going straight from footy to the other side of it where I guess was that different for you, or was it just kind of all because it was all football, it was you're still in the system, even at a different club, it was all just very easy, and obviously fitness, something you know very well. Was that an easy transformation from playing into retirement?
No, I'd worked in marketing.
Yeah.
So I did a master's degree in business, and then I didn't like it that much in terms of eating and getting fat and doing nothing. So Brian Smith offered me a job when I quit, and things happen for a reason. Like I really respect Alan Jones, but I didn't like his management style. So I decided to leave, and Brian gave us a start, and actually it was one of the first full-time jobs that went there. So, and it was good work with Brian Smith because he's so structured. So, no, it was good. We had Rocket Reddy and Nathan Brown and Chock Mundine and, so many good players there, Brian Johnson and Mark Coyne. So, just a great bunch of guys.
So we've got to talk about 89, and you probably talk about this more than any other, other year of your career. But it's a fantastic season from you guys. I mean, you win the minor premiership, I think, by 5 points, but you start the year with a loss against East, 14-0 at the SFS. But then after that, you go on a 12-game winning streak. How early in that winning streak did you sit there with some of the other older fellas, and I say that with respect, guys that have been around a little bit and been around the joint for a while. How early in that winning streak did you guys go, well, hang on, we've got something special here, something's cooking?
Well, we just kept going.
Mm.
Like, there's nothing special about it. You just do your best every week. And then George come in. I think George dropped me 3 times that year.
Did he?
Yeah.
Did you think you were playing? Did you think you were playing good footy? Like, or was that just something George would do?
Oh, that's George. George had his favourites and guys that he'd play, and I knew my limitations. But it was interesting. The third time he dropped me, I said, George, I made 55 tackles. I never made a mistake. Never give it a penalty, and you dropped me again. Give me a reason why. I played a bloke out of position. I think he played Tony Rampling in at hooker.
Mm.
So that was his reason. I said, okay.
Mm.
So that was okay.
So you go through to round 14. You lose to Penrith, who are obviously on the doorsteps of doing something amazing themselves. And then from that loss, you only lose one more game that season, and that's against your mate Gavin Miller's Cronulla Sharks before the finals. You win the minor premiership. I mean, it must have been rocking around Redfern at that point. Just to play in the team and potentially be on the cusp of something amazing.
Yeah, no, we're looking okay, and George was, he was doing everything he could, and we're just, a lot of guys were carrying injuries, and just the little things, the kick returns and things. It just didn't happen. Yeah, and there was other things too, like Ian Roberts was, there's other things happening with the club, financially. And then Ian Roberts was signing autographs. Ian Roberts 89, so that started to lead me to think, oh, well, he's not going to be here next year. And I guess little things like that start off and set off with things.
And you look back at it with hindsight, you say, they were struggling with money. I mean, South's basically fall off a cliff after that, and they have a horrible period in the 90s where they, end up being the whipping boys for a long time through that. And obviously George hangs around, becomes the boss of the club and all the rest. So you get the weekend off, and in that period too, the Sharks, they beat the Broncos in a playoff midweek at the new Parramatta Stadium, or new enough anyway, 38-14. Canberra then beat the Sharks 31-10, and Balmain 24 beat the Panthers 12. You come up against Balmain, there's 40,000 people at the SFS, and like I just said, I've kind of been keeping an eye on the second half of that game on my telly here. There's 9 Tigers from that grand final team that lost to Canterbury in '88. The way you've been explaining it to me over the last 38 minutes or so, with the injuries you guys had, Balmain are hungry. They're fueled by what happened to them the year before, and you guys hang with them for most of the game. But throughout, from what I could see, they may have just been maybe half a yard quicker in everything they did. Would that be fair?
Well, that's where Jimmy Jack was returning the ball. So instead of being in the no glory zone inside your 40 metres or 30 metres, they'd get out of it and we'd be still working hard. And the defence is a lot tighter in that 30-metre mark.
And
so it just wears you down.
And that's the thing too. Like obviously, you may not say it, and I guess this is the big difference between games from then and now, where you might have a first, a big 15 minutes to start the game from one opposition pack, and the other team with penalties and momentum and all the rest of it, they can fight their way back into it. But if you're behind the 8 ball from the first 10 minutes, I mean, you are basically hanging on for the rest of the game, and it's almost a miracle in these semi-finals to get back and actually hold on and have enough energy at the back end of the game to actually win it.
Right, absolutely. And And it's even getting, and now the game's become more professional. And, one missed tackle, one drop ball, one error of judgment, and that could be the turning point for the game. Yeah, man, it's that's professional sport.
There was a little note that I've scribbled down in between the rest of them. I don't know if you remember this or if you watched the game back recently, but there was a moment right on the start of the second half. Your winger Harrington goes down the sideline and scores a try. And it's a fair try. The pass is good, but the touchy calls it back. And I know you guys score again after that, and it's tight throughout most of the second half. But would that have made much a difference if the ref gives that try? If Harrigan says that's a try, would that be enough? Butterfly effect and sliding doors and all the rest of it. Do you look back at little things like that, or do you just think, Balmain were too good for us?
I think they deserve the win. When we're both struggling clubs, and they had a big pack too.
Yeah, they
were
did.
Monsters.
Yeah. And then, so from there, you guys go down, and you guys are, you've done a mighty effort throughout the year with the injuries you've had, and then all of a sudden, your next game, you've got to come up against the Red Hot Raiders, who I think went on their own winning streak through the season. And they're on the cusp of, I think, 89 they win, 90 they win, 91 they lose to Penrith. Was there a bit of, here we go, we've got to find a way to bounce back and get up against Canberra, or was it, there was still a bit of hope?
I know, we were confident. And then, as I said, my game was over in 2 minutes. But the guys played really well and did their most. Again, we're probably just a bit light on in size.
Yeah.
Because they had some monsters in the side, and their back line was bigger than their forwards. So, and when you look at the players they had, it was nearly half the Queensland State of Origin.
Yeah. I can just imagine what it's like. You've busted your ass for 2 or 3 tackles, and you're stopping Lazarus, or you got Steve Walters, who was a unit himself. He comes at you, Todd, all the rest of them. And they throw it out the back line, and then you got Malmaniga running at you.
Absolutely. And then he wins 3 or 4 premierships, Glenn Lazarus. Yeah.
He's a freak. But even in that game, like, you guys were, you were gutsy. I mean, even at half-time, David, in that game, 12 all. But, I guess that was your last hurrah, because Canberra go on to win 32-16. It's really, really hard to answer this, because you don't know what's around the corner, and I guess as a club, you've done really well through the second half of the 80s, but it kind of all fell apart for South after that. You said Alan Jones came into the club, and you finished up as well. Like Ian Roberts left, and I think, when did Les Davidson go to Cronulla? He went soon after, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
I was there till 94, I think. I went to St. George. And then Mario went to North Sydney, and Bundy went to Cronulla. Yeah. And then George was trying to save the Leeds club, so there wasn't any money for the football club. And, Frank Curry took over as coach. And then even when George took over as coach, he wasn't getting paid. The money that he got, he just gave it to the assistant coaches. So we did really well, when you talk about it. But if you don't have money and spirit and culture, you just can't just do it on culture alone. Yeah.
Well, we're getting to the back end here, David, and I've really enjoyed listening to you talk about your career and a great Southside from the back end of the 80s. But a couple of random ones for you, and one that got brought up by a mate who emailed me today and said, "Mate, you got to ask David this." 84 semi-final at their siege against St. George, and Roy Masters tells it from an article he wrote in the Herald, and I'll give you a quote. He says, The brawl spread from one side of the field to the other. It seemed to last an eternity. So he's talking about a semi-final against you guys, and apparently you guys were instructed on the second scrum of the game to start a fisticuff, and apparently it was an all-time fight. What happened there, and how many did you get in?
So that was after we'd had the game. We were down 14-0 with Manly the week before. And then Dean Rampton called Henry, so Henry was glad to head and hit it. So we went okay against Manly, but you had Craig Young and Pat Jarvis, and even Slippery Morris didn't mind throwing them. So that was a bit of a different battle. But yeah, it was pretty tough and pretty fun, and that was like rugby league was about. You throw punches and then you had to beer with them afterwards. And it was interesting enough, I'd end up going, played for St. George. I coached there, and I coached in the St. George Illawarra Dragons as well. But that's just the game, and you accept it, and quite an interesting story.
All right, so we'll play some word association. So I'm going to mention a name, and you just tell us your first word that pops into your head, all right?
Yeah.
All right. George Piggins.
Great guy.
Yeah. Mario.
Legend.
I feel like you're going to say legend a few times here. Les Davidson.
True, mate.
Tugger.
Legend.
Phil Blake.
Solid.
Yeah, solid. Redfern Oval.
The Hello Ground.
Gavin Miller.
Tough but fair.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll finish with this one, and I've asked a few other blokes this one as well, and I'll just ask three. Who did you find your three toughest opponents? I know that's putting you on the spot, but who comes to mind when you think, oh, geez, we've got these blokes this week. How do I get over this guy?
Steve Jackson.
Steve Jackson, yeah.
And Kevin Ward, an English guy.
Yep.
He had the best elbow ever.
So how do you tackle someone that can get their elbow up I guess it's like a bit of a bumper bar holding the footy, right? Is that with the ball or defensively?
Well, it's one thing they hold the ball, but they can move their elbow any shape they want it. They can bend over. So, John Harvey was very good with it as well. But now they're policing a lot better. But yeah, it was pretty tough to cop the elbow in the jaw or the head or the eye or somewhere.
So Kevin Ward, and I had a giggle, I kind of spoke over to you then, Sam Bacco and Steve Jackson, who we've had on the show before, and he's pretty keen to do another one because he's a pretty talkative fella, and I reckon he could sell iced Eskimos, old Steve Jackson. But
he was big and fast.
Yeah. And he's underrated too because obviously he did what he did at Canberra in '89, but after that he took the opportunity and went on and became a good front row in his own right.
Yeah. Well, he went to that Poison Chalice, didn't he? He went to Seagulls, didn't he?
Yeah, he had a couple of good years at the Magpies under Walk, and then he went to the Seagulls after that, and he was kind of done, I think. But
yeah.
All right, mate. Well, look, that's been brilliant. I just wanted to thank you again for your time. And again, as I said, and hang on, I didn't mention this as well. I've scribbled it down somewhere, and I didn't mention it before. But of your 169 games, am I right in saying that 152 of them were straight?
Yeah, I went for a real good period without injury, and then all of a sudden the knee just started. If it wasn't the one knee, it went to the other leg. Yeah, the other side.
All right, real quickly, one sentence. If a South fan's out there, and I said to them, what do you think of David Boyle, or how do you remember him? How do you want to be remembered by South Sydney and rugby league fans in general as a player?
Just a loyal South Sydney player that's pretty humble.
Perfect.
Fit and can take a hiding.
David, thank you again, mate. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'm sure we'll do it again sometime in the future. Good on you.
Likewise, Curtis. Thank you for the opportunity.